It's like an interesting question. Like, do we, because the war is so opposed, do we still stick through it? To have the end that we sought for, but because there's such opposition at home, is the timeline. The timeline is like it's like that was like the first thing Obama said they're going to be out in 2 years. But would we have done that, in World War II or something? Would we have wanted to finish the job? I don't know. What do you think?
Okay. Well, first, high register on the hypocrisy meter. Who set the ultimate deadlines for getting U.S. troops out of Iraq? Anybody know?
Bush.
President Bush. October 2000, before the election. Before the elections, the Bush administration signed the Status of Forces Agreement, a legally binding document with the government of Iraq, calling not just for timelines, but mandatory withdrawal of all U.S. troops, all U.S. mercenaries, closing of all U.S. military bases in Iraq by the end of next year. That's about as big a timeline. Then there was various stages along the line, including drawing down the number of troops, ending the combat mission, etc. So, and that was signed under Bush. And somehow that detail has just like vanished off into the ether, that little legally binding agreement to which the United States has signed. There's a big loophole in it, which I think Bush definitely planned to use, and Obama may well, which is that if either side calls on the other to keep the troops, well, then it's okay. But the principle of setting timelines that forces the local government to negotiate, to come to a political settlement internally, I think makes a lot of sense. It's something that happens anyway. You look at Vietnam, once the U.S. was kicked out, there was a political settlement, right? One side won. In every other war since World War II, that's been the case. So what's wrong with actually having a signed legal document that commits you to doing that? I think it would make a lot of sense in Afghanistan as well. Now, the problem is that the U.S. doesn't fight fair. It signs agreements and then goes back on them. And so right now, supposedly, the combat role is over, except they're still fighting. The U.S. troops are not doing anything different today in Iraq than they were a month ago. There's just fewer of them. There's 50,000. And the military is going to fight really hard to keep that 50,000 there permanently. That's their goal. I don't think they're going to get away with it. I think that mainly the people in Iraq are not going to let them do it. So to answer your question directly, besides which, World War II was a very different war.
Yeah,
it has nothing to do, it had everything to do with stopping fascism on a world scale, and the invasion of Iraq had everything to do with protecting U.S. strategic oil and other empire desires, and they're very, very different kinds of wars.
This is going to be your closing statement. Can you say a bit more about what you learned from the conversations with terrorists? You get a lot into that into the book, and I think it's really interesting.
What did I learn? First of all, I learned to listen a lot, and I've been traveling to that part of the world a lot. My first trip to Israel and Palestine was in 1986, and I've been to every country in the region 4 or 5 times, sometimes a lot more. But I learned something new every time. And so I learned to listen. So Khalid Mashal is a good example, the head of Hamas. When we finally did get to meet him, I really disagree with what Hamas stands for. You read their charter, and again in my book I go into great detail of this. It's a reactionary document. It's anti-Jewish, it's anti-women, it's anti-Palestine national liberation. They saw themselves as a religious alternative to the national liberation movement of the Palestinian people. But the Hamas of 1986-87 is not the Hamas of today. They really have changed. And Mashal, despite being vilified as a new Hitler or terrorist supreme, is actually a very, very intelligent guy who understands that Israel is a powerful force that's going to stay in the Middle East, and that Hamas is going to have to come to terms with that. And Hamas is willing to accept, again, contrary to all the propaganda that we get in the United States, everything that Israel and the United States says, Hamas will accept a 2-state solution. And they're on record as saying that. It's just you have to know how to read the documents and cut through the